Moving into a new apartment building is a routine, exhausting experience. You carry heavy boxes up flights of stairs, navigate dimly lit corridors, and focus entirely on getting your life unpacked. Eventually, you head to the front desk. The receptionist hands over your new keys with a warm, welcoming smile. It is exactly the standard interaction you expect on moving day. But then she adds a specific condition to your stay. She warns you to never, under any circumstances, disturb the door with no number. If you were carrying a television or dragging a heavy suitcase, you wouldn't think much of it. The physical labor of moving in creates a distraction, and you brush off the odd comment to finish settling in. By drawing a boundary and telling you not to cross it, the hallway loses its neutrality. You are no longer just walking past a door, you are walking past a restriction. This diagram illustrates the behavioral model of reactance, the hardwired human response triggered whenever our freedom's unlimited. Notice how the force pushes back, breaching the boundary. The brain interprets an explicit restriction as a challenge, generating a cognitive itch demanding a response. While the man in our story was hauling boxes and organizing his kitchen, that physical labor acted as a temporary buffer against the itch. But as the physical work ends, the brain loses its primary focus. Without a task to occupy the senses, the mental friction of the warning grows until the mystery of the door is the only thing left to think about. The apartment is finally quiet, the unpacking is finished, and the man is left alone with his own thoughts. The casual warning from the front desk begins to echo. He shifts from ignoring the restriction to actively fixating on the reasons behind it. His curiosity demands action. He steps out of his new apartment and walks down the hall, seeking out the unnumbered door. He reaches out and tries the doorknob, but it is locked shut. This is a natural stopping point, presenting him with a final opportunity to turn back and return to a normal evening. Finding the door locked doesn't provide closure. Instead, the physical resistance suggests the secret inside is worth protecting, which only deepens his preoccupation. To bypass the lock, he drops to his knees. He leans his head in and presses his eye against the cold metal to peer through the keyhole. He scans the space inside. Hardwood floors, bare walls. The room appears empty, creating a brief, almost disappointing sense of anticlimax. Then his eye catches the distant corner. Standing in the shadows is a woman with pale skin and long black hair. Her posture defies logic. She isn't moving and she isn't facing the door. She is standing motionless, her face pressed flat against the wall. He crossed the boundary expecting a satisfying answer. Instead, the visual subverts every expectation, delivering a wave of inexplicable dread. In a typical horror story, this is the moment the protagonist screams, but our protagonist reacts differently. He steps back, feeling the guilt of a voyeur who just invaded a stranger's privacy. This diagram breaks down his cognitive dissonance. A visual friction point forms between conflicting states, his self-image as a polite neighbor versus the reality of his voyeurism. To relieve this friction, his brain deploys a coping mechanism, bridging the gap with a logical explanation. He pieces together a flimsy excuse. He decides that the figure must simply be an eccentric tenant who prefers to stare at walls and does not wish to be disturbed. Confronted with the impossible, the human mind will instinctively invent a boring lie. It is easier to imagine a strange neighbor than it is to process a reality that breaks the rules of the natural world. He returns to his apartment, but the familiar comfort of his own four walls feels different. The door to his unit is no longer a shield. It is just another thin barrier in a building that contains things he cannot explain. There is a tragic irony here. Technically, he followed the receptionist's instructions. He never disturbed the room. Yet he is punished by the weight of knowing what is waiting on the other side of the wall. No one forced him into the hallway. The trigger for this haunting was self-inflicted, born from an inability to let an unsolved mystery go. The woman standing in the numberless room poses no active threat. The actual danger is the guarantee that, given a closed door and a whispered warning, human curiosity will always force us to. Curiosity is a difficult impulse to turn off. The day after his first strange encounter, the man returns to the hallway. Driven by a need to understand what he saw, he drops to his knees and presses his face against the cold brass of the keyhole. He expects to finally see the interior of the apartment, or perhaps the pale woman herself. Instead, his entire field of vision is filled with a solid, impenetrable wall of red. Faced with something entirely inexplicable, the human mind immediately scrambles for a logical anchor. He quickly decides that the pale woman must have caught him peeking the day before, and she deliberately blocked the hole to keep him out. He runs through the mundane possibilities. Someone stuffed a piece of red cloth in the lock. Maybe they taped up some construction paper, or smeared a dab of thick paint over the glass. This mental leap is highly effective. By reducing a strange, unnatural anomaly to a boring, everyday household action, his brain shuts off the alarm bells. It gives him an immediate, false sense of security. We routinely project ordinary logic onto bizarre events to keep ourselves from panicking. It's a convenient survival mechanism, but it creates a massive blind spot to actual danger. Leaving the silent, locked door behind, he decides to try a more active approach. He heads down to the hotel lobby to find some concrete answers. He approaches the receptionist, but before he can even launch into his explanation, she lets out a heavy sigh and asks, "You looked through the keyhole, didn't you?" The weight of that sigh reveals a history. His curiosity followed a specific, predictable trajectory that the building staff have clearly seen play out many times before. Every building has a quiet observer. The mundane staff running the front desk almost always hold the actual history of a location, tracking the dark patterns that temporary visitors never notice. He admits that he looked, and because he crossed that threshold, she is obligated to break her silence and tell him what he's actually dealing with. Asking the question means you immediately lose the comfort of ignorance, and the answers waiting on the other side rarely leave you better off. The receptionist pulls the story back in time. Long before he ever checked into the building, someone else occupied that specific apartment. A husband and wife lived there. They weren't normal tenants. They maintained an intense, unnatural isolation from the rest of the building. Eventually, that isolation gave way to something worse. The husband lost his mind, a decline that ended when he murdered his wife right inside those walls. The revelation of the historical murder recontextualizes the apartment door. It stands as the final physical boundary between the man and the site of a violent crime. Trauma has a habit of sinking into the floorboards. Extreme violence leaves a residual imprint, waiting perfectly still in the quiet until someone decides to come looking. But the receptionist has one final detail to share. The couple who lived in that room did not look like everyone else. They shared a distinct set of genetic traits: incredibly pale skin, framed by thick, stark black hair, and the woman, the wife who was killed in that room, possessed intensely red eyes. When a spherical object is placed flush against a keyhole, it blocks all light, completely filling the observer's vision. The red wasn't cloth. As a second sightline crosses the threshold, the mechanical reality is clear. The obstruction was an eye. She was looking back. While he knelt in the hallway, squinting for clarity, a murdered woman stood inches away on the other side of the wood, locking her gaze onto his through the narrow passage. We tend to think of curiosity as a flashlight in a dark room. We rarely stop to wonder if the darkness can see us too. Because while the man believed he was secretly looking into the darkness, he never stopped to consider that the darkness might be looking back.